The Titan build I am playing is currently bugged and can give you 100% overshield uptime, while this Hunter build exploits the new Guardian Games legendary waveframe grenade launcher to cause practically everything we do to jolt enemies, which loops into infinite grenades. And did you ever expect to see Divinity in PvP, especially after the ammo changes? These are just some of the 7 builds that my concerningly coherent hive-minded stream chat has given to me to test that I found to have something really special to talk about. And I want to present their fundamental ideas to you at home to take and build your own versions of awesome with these clever combos. Let's start with the massive buff that came to everyone's least favorite exotic SMG, the Manticore. Manticore was one of the few weapons that had a massive overhaul with the March 5th patch. Previously, its catalyst only granted a mild damage resistance while floating airborne with its perk, which if you ask any SMG fans, they would tell you this did very little to make up for the massive downside of being an easy-to-punish floating target. Its largest problem was its inability to sustain itself once hovering, something its rework tackles directly by changing 4 major things. Number 1 was its ease of use. Previously, if you wanted to get out of the air, you either had to swap weapons, or worse, wait for the buff to end. This made it a horrible choice if you needed to maintain your pressure on a target, but needed to shift positions. But not anymore. Now, not only do you need to be airborne for half a second to activate its perk, helping mitigate accidents of falling from 1-inch steps and finding yourself awkwardly floating in the air, but also you can now easily remove your float by simply pressing your alt fire button. The second change this weapon received was to have a version of subsistence added to its catalyst. This buff may seem simple, but the biggest reason you would likely find yourself unwillingly plummeting out of the sky was the time it took for you to reload, severely limiting your uptime with your bonus damage. The third change is my personal favorite. Kills now grant you 1/3 of a void overshield after every kill while airborne. This change is monumental to build crafting as it's effectively a juiced-up version of Repulsor Brace, a fan-favorite perk for PvE settings. But of course it's better than Repulsor, as it requires no added debuffs to loop literally infinite bonus protection from kills. But apparently Bungie wanted to make sure that we never spoke poorly of this exotic ever again, because its last change feels like a legal cheat in PvE. Number 4. While airborne, enemies are less likely to target you. The way to think about this is like having invisibility. Enemies will still try and shoot at you, but they won't be very good at it, allowing you more time to dish out the damage you need without as much of a threat of being lit up like a Christmas tree. To best make use of this build, I think either Warlock or Titan are best. For Warlock, try using this with the Astrocyte verse. As funny as this looks, this allows you to blink while floating to cover massive distances and cause Volatile to any enemies nearby. The Volatile can cascade into Devour by running Echo of Cessation with Echo of Starvation. For Titan, we really leaned into a very underused exotic armor piece, the No Backup Plans. The backup plans causes shotgun eliminations to grant us a void overshield alongside additional shotgun damage and health regeneration. Of the two, the Warlock will be great for utility and ad clear, whereas the Titan has far more damage potential. And of course, both are tons of fun in PvP, with those buffs feeling far more impactful in your moment-to-moment fights, with special weapons and abilities being less common. Speaking of PvP, Divinity is far from optimal in the fast-paced fights of Crucible, but its ease of use and unique properties can be extremely rewarding for a clever Warlock. Abilities generically come back slower since the March 5th patch, but this has had a weird side effect of causing exotics and perks that grant set percentages of your abilities to secretly get a buff. Let's say in the last sandbox we got our grenade back in 60 seconds. That means that every time a perk that gives us 10% of our grenade back, we would get a return of 6 seconds. Now let's say in this new sandbox, our grenade comes back in 120 seconds. Now if we trigger that 10% return, we're getting twice the amount of return of 12 seconds, completely circumventing the global nerfs. And I know what you're thinking. Didn't Bungie specifically scale perks like this so it had a similar return on time? And you would be right if you were talking about armor mods like Grenade Kickstart. Enter the Warlock Exotic, the Getaway Artist. These grant amplified and a more powerful and smarter Arc Soul that grants us grenade energy when this powerful Arc Soul deals damage, which as you likely guessed operated on this percentage system. This is where Divinity comes into play. This return on energy only happens on hits, and while the Arc Soul burst is fast, it's avoidable. But not so avoidable when you have your critical hitbox becoming the size of an adolescent Cabal. This build took me some time getting used to, but once I found a rhythm, I ended up with an extremely high KD. But even if you don't have Divinity, or perhaps would rather find something more standard, run this instead with the Centrifuge and its Catalyst. Alright, let's talk about Hunters. The Hullabaloo is the newest and currently the only other heavy waveframe grenade launcher in the game. A lot of the discussion surrounding the weapon has involved the combination of both Volt Shot and Chain Reaction. But personally, I think there is a better combo that a hunter especially can take massive advantage of, using a bit of a forgotten about exotic chess piece, the Lucky Raspberry. I think it's safe to say that there are a few other weapons in the game that have the jolt chaining capabilities that the Hullabaloo does. And with a long since forgotten about buff to the Raspberry, they become the perfect complement to each other. The Raspberry now not only increases the chaining capabilities of arc bolts, but will also generate grenade energy whenever you damage targets with jolt strikes or collect ionic traces, which is why I prefer running my Hullabaloo with Golden Tricorn. This perk is extremely easy to proc on the wide AoE of a heavy waveframe grenade launcher, and with Volt Shot, this will even feed back into our grenade for a near perfect loop of bonus damage and crowd control. But to really seal the deal, combine your setup with the Indebted Kindness from the new Warlord's Ruin dungeon, with Volt Shot and Lead from Gold and the Tempest Strike. Lean your build hard into Amplified, and remember to cycle your abilities as often as they come up. But if I am being honest, if you really wanted to cycle abilities, then Titan might be more your style for our fourth build. In a previous video, we covered how potent ACT Zeros can really be because all they need is the mod Stacks on Stacks and Charged Up to suddenly make just one punch, give us enough charge to deal over half the health and damage to our attacker. Well, it turns out that we could have taken this even further. By running this exact same setup with a glaive, we take this ridiculous power spike and triple it! Glaive melees work with the ACT Zeros, so by landing all 3 consecutive hits for an elimination in PvP, or on smaller enemies in PvE, we just gave ourselves more stacks of armor charge than we could ever reasonably need! We can then convert these charges into energy for mods like the Kickstart mods or the font mods. But as you are seeing in this background footage, we aren't just using any normal glaive for all this. This is the Vexcalibur, the exotic void glaive that grants overshields while guarding, and bonus melee damage while we have this shield. What we are doing here is cycling an infinite loop of overshield just by holding out the Vexcalibur. Glaives now passively regenerate their guard, and the Vexcalibur grants overshield that is just long enough to allow us to begin chaining it infinitely. Take this and couple it with the offensive bulwark Titan aspect, and suddenly even your grenade is getting in on the infinite recharge action. Even without ammo, the free grenade energy, charges of light, and of course the overshields is well worth this setup, and is an extremely clever way to almost completely remove the ability uptime nerfs, sort of like this next build back on Warlocks. With special weapons being far less present on the field, having access to them more regularly is comparatively far more impactful than ever before. And while I could drum up the circumstances surrounding this build and the science behind it all, I think it's easier to simply say, try the Revision Zero, specifically the 4-burst mode. The Revision's exotic trait will fill up faster the more shots you fire, and will give you a free sniper shot after about 2-ish kills. We gave ourselves even more flexibility with a shotgun, but as always, find what works best for you. Let's keep going. You know, it's a tad ironic that with the massive sandbox update, we get the Guardian Game's Origin trait, which grants us class ability energy. This build pushes the Origin traits to its limits, and gives us a build that can sweep both PvP and PvE. These are the Briarbinds. They allow us to pick up and redeploy our Child of the Old Gods, and grant it bonus damage on eliminations. But do you recall everything a Void Buddy does when it's active? Besides dealing damage, the Void Buddy will also cause a weakening effect to any trapped inside, and will give us an additional buff depending on if we are in a healing rift or an empowering rift. Empowering grants healing per tick, but what we care about is the healing rift, which will cause a void vampirism debuff, feeding all of our abilities energy. While we could stop here and use this as a way to fast forward our cooldowns, science demands we take it even further. Briarbinds effectively grants us an infinite source of weakening effects, which we can convert directly into Orbs of Light and even armor charges with Echo of Harvest. Echo of Harvest will spit out an orb of power every time we score an elimination on a weakened enemy. In PvE, this could turn our Void Soul into quite literally an infinite source of orbs and ability energy, while in PvP, this can cut in line of the tempo of every opponent's abilities in the lobby. What's not to love? Well, just make sure that your Void Buddy doesn't fall in the line of duty. But while this build is great, it wasn't my favorite on this list today. That honor goes to our last build on Hunter. In PvP, health pools were increased, but so was weapon damages. This basically lowered the impact of all abilities, but still kept some old combos while opening up a few more. Knucklehead Radar grants us radar while aimed down sights at our enemies, and a tracking mark that increases damage the target takes the lower their health gets. Hopefully you can see where this is going. The increase to base HP gives this previously impossible to practically use part of this exotic more breathing room. On bigger damage per shot weapons, this won't be too noticeable until it no longer matters. But on rapid fire weapons, it can be a game changer, which is why we ran this with none other than a trace rifle. Because trace rifles fire 1,000 rounds per minute in small chunks, this grants any trace rifle we equip with the Knucklehead Radar a miniature version of Coldheart's damage increasing perk, making our once respectably fast burning laser beam into an almost guaranteed score. But then there's the other half of the Knucklehead, the side that allows us some fantastic awareness, regardless of what we're doing. Knucklehead is basically begging us to hardscope with something. So why not give ourselves some bonus damage for doing so? Box breathing on a 180 scout such as this Glissando turns it into a repeatable 3-tapping machine at nearly any range. And now with our exotic armor, there are practically zero downsides for doing so. Perhaps my favorite part of this whole setup is that it can be efficiently transferred onto whatever subclass you would like, and it works just the same. This pairing is entirely subclass neutral and rewarded me far too generously for something so simple. I almost feel bad to the sandbox for showing me these, but hey, at least we had fun. Subscribe, bless your faces, and deuces.